My name's John Beck. I'm the Executive Director for the National Center for Autonomous Technologies. Put that out there because I know we've got a couple of new faces that may be plugging into this call today. We've got a group that's come together pretty fast and furious and doing a lot of brainstorming in the last couple of weeks, looking at transition to distance delivery environments, both for the virtual classroom transition that we're seeing across technical education, but a lot of the core NCAT team members have a lot of activities coming up as far as educator workshops, STEM camps, student competitions, and those different types of activities that would typically be ramping up right now into the summer and through the fall on. And looking at the current situation, we know it's not going to be possible. We've canceled most of those events and are kind of looking at new and innovative ways to still be able to reach out to those participants and still have some of those same activities in a different format. So that's been the group coming together here. I know most were on the line last week where we did a high-level overview of everything from VR to video capture. Then the intent moving forward is to have some more detailed nuts and bolts sessions like what you're going to see today that dive into each of those different areas that we'd talked about. In the case of today, we're looking at virtual conferences and collaborative environments. We've got Mark Gill with the St. Cloud State Visualization Lab, or Viz Lab, who's going to be talking about how to create more engaging environments. I know, like many of you, I'm sitting in virtual meetings, Zoom and Teams, 4 to 6 hours a day right now, and that's a daunting task. I know Vince is planning out the GeoEd conference that's taking place in June and kind of thinking about how to really enhance the engagement, realizing it's going to be tough for people to be sitting at a computer all day long. So I think the presentation that Mark's gonna put on today, looking at how to create more engaging virtual environments, is going to be really good to kind of lead that discussion. And we've had meetings between CAVES, the Center for Aviation and Automotive Technological Education, using virtual schools. We've had conversations with CAVES and St. Cloud State here in the last week, kind of looking at some of these different dynamics. SESU focusing on the presentation today, and then CAVES is going to do a follow-on presentation looking at the development of digital interactive content. They've been a nationally funded by the National Science Foundation for many, many years, focused on that type of resource and providing that out. So they're going to do a follow-up here. I just got an email from Kapil, who may also be on the line. It looks like we're targeting the May 5th date at 1 p.m. To have that discussion, which I know is something. Both of these presentations are going to be something of interest for both the group, but we also see on a national scale right now a lot of people trying to figure out how to transition to the digital distance modalities, and thinking about technical education and how far you can push those boundaries. I think we've got Craig McAtee with the National Coalition of Advanced Technology Centers on the line as well, who had facilitated a interesting discussion with the AACC last week, kind of talking about their positioning and concerns with the technical education transition into these environments and how far you can push that limit. And I know that's something Kapil will be able to talk about in his presentation, is all the great resources they have and the methodology that they use for development of the tasks and skills and evaluation criteria that goes into their work. So lots of good presentations coming down the road here, and I guess I won't take up any more time with the introduction. I'll pass this back to Mark Gill with the Visualization Lab at St. Cloud State to lead today's discussion, and then we'll kind of talk about the follow-up after that.
Okay. Well, can everybody hear me all right? Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
I can
excellent.
hear you and I see your screen.
Okay, so what we're looking at here, this is a virtual space that we've constructed that we use as a classroom and a presentation environment. There's several areas of this, and it's designed to facilitate classroom presentation and group discussion and meetings. And as the camera gets down to the stage, I'm going to move it just a little bit and present it so everybody can see the slides. This is myself and my partner in crime, Alan Schrock from the St. Cloud State University Meteorology Department. We've been working collaboratively for about 8 weeks, developing virtual spaces, getting involved in alt space and trying to figure out how we can transition our classes and our presentations into this social VR sort of environment. And today I'm going to be talking about, with Alan's help, on teaching using social VR. First, I would like to take a minute and pay some respects to another casualty of the coronavirus, a program that we were involved with together called Minnesota NICE. NICE stands for Networked Immersive Collaborative Environment. It was funded by the Minnesota State System Office, and it involved getting large groups of people together in a confined space, all sharing and wearing VR headsets and doing all sorts of things that sound really horrible today.
Yeah.
But
instead of everybody remote, it was everybody in the same room seeing the same new virtual experience together. And now it's the exact opposite of what we need. But it was a great idea. And we got a lot of cool stuff from the project.
We did. We got a lot of really cool stuff from the project. And the nature of the work that we were doing in the project actually sort of was the precursor. It laid out the groundwork for the research that we're doing now. So it's Minnesota NICE isn't completely dead. I think it lives on in some form. But the story really starts when I encountered the Educators in VR virtual reality conference. There's 2 events that happened right back to back that really opened my eyes about the possibility of social virtual reality. The Educators in VR is a group that uses virtual reality as an educational platform. They've been together for actually a number of years, developing and teaching in virtual reality environments such as this. They held a conference last February. It ran for 6 days. There were 150 speakers and about 6,000 attendees across a variety of different virtual worlds and virtual platforms such as this. It was really an astounding experience. I got a lot out of it, and it was all the good parts about going to a conference without the going part.
I like the going part to a conference, but you did get to see all sorts of talks and other things. It was really cool.
Yeah. The other eye-opening event was IEEE VR. Their conference was completely canceled by the COVID virus, and then over the course of about 2 weeks, they transitioned the entire proceedings into virtual reality using Mozilla Hubs. Now, this was IEEE VR. I would expect if there's a group that could do this in 2 weeks, it would be IEEE VR. But these 2 events really sort of set the snowball rolling for us, looking at this platforming and opening our eyes to the different possibilities. So what exactly?
Yeah, if you think about it real quick, we started this, the conference was mid-February. So we were talking about this even before some of the COVID stuff hit. And it just went from, this is something we need to look at, to this is something we need to look at now in the span of about 2 weeks. It was crazy how we went from, this is really interesting, to this is necessity.
Yeah, it was lightning fast right there at the beginning. So when we talk about social VR, or sometimes the term is collaborative VR, right? The environment is designed for networked social interaction. I can see Alan can see me, and we're both using Oculus Quest headsets. So we have a fairly natural sense of bodily presence. I can see my hands and talk with my hands. I see the motion of the head. We see our mouths move when we talk. It's very engaging. And even though we look like cartoons, I buy into it very quickly. And a lot of people do. They buy into that engagement.
Right. And Mark looks like Mark in real life. I look kind of like me in real life. So you can tell it's the right voice. It's even similar mannerisms because I'm moving my arms the way I would when I normally talk because I'm holding controllers and doing what I would do.
I do weigh about 100 pounds lighter in virtual reality. I like that a lot.
Yeah, me too.
So as we were just talking about, this whole rush to get online and look for alternatives is driving a spike in demand for these sort of virtual reality. What was that? So I'm getting a really bad echo from somebody.
Yeah.
So there's a spike in demand for these sort of environments and this sort of presentation medium. One of the things that's challenging about doing research for this presentation is finding current statistics on virtual reality market usage and adoption that reflect the impact of the virus. All of the market resources that I have go up to the last quarter of 2019 and don't reflect this increase in the demand. But a lot of people are looking to find an online replacement for previously face-to-face functions. So things like job fairs and conferences, workshops, classes. We had to build a virtual campus tour, and we built it in Altspace so that candidates for the new dean's position could come in here and take a tour of the facilities, which normally they would do, but now they can't. And then other people are looking for social engagement, a way that I can have a natural feeling conversation with another human being and just not feel quite so isolated and detached from everything. And then there's
one more thing that I want to add to that is it's really fun to be able to talk with the group like you would talk with the group. So instead of staring at a flat screen, it's been really interesting. We've had 5 or 6 of us, and we naturally make that circle as people join in or move around or whatever. So the conversation dynamics we normally do, it feels like you're in a room where seeing a grid of faces doesn't give you that kind of immersive, I'm in a real conversation with real people feel.
Right.
And with a client like Altspace, it even does spatial audio. So Mark's voice comes from over here, and if somebody were standing over there, their voice would come in more in that ear. And so it feels a lot like you're in this room way more than a group Zoom chat would.
Sure, absolutely. And then there's some secondary benefits that people are discovering from the use of this. It saves a lot of money on time and expense. You know, I talked about being able to go to a conference without the going part to the conference. Turns out the going to a conference is quite expensive. You've got travel costs, you've got hotel costs, you've got food costs, you've got infrastructure you have to pay for, and all of that sort of evaporates when you hold your conference in an area like this. And then we've got a reduction on the carbon emissions. And since I have an actual meteorologist over here, I'll let him talk about that.
Right. So basically, there's been all sorts of interesting takes all over the world, actually. The more that there has been a reduction in people traveling, the more we've seen that pollution release has been less. So Mark mentions on the slide here reduced carbon emissions, and that's been very true for carbon dioxide that's measured. The map you see up here is nitrogen dioxide, and similar major reductions in the amount of pollution that are being put out from places. Now, this is good and bad. I mean, bad maybe for the economy because things aren't happening, but the idea that we may be able to limit travel and move certain things to this online world, even after some of the virus stuff goes away, has some appeal for public health as well. So there's lots of aspects for what we can do with this medium. And we're going to talk about a bunch of them here coming along too.
Sure, absolutely. And then you've got the support and the connection aspect that comes along with it too. It's largely anecdotal, but I've heard from a lot of people that Altspace and things like Altspace are keeping them sane during this time. It's a pretty remarkable thing.
Yeah, we were talking to a guy from England a couple of weeks ago who just was, he was in his 70s and was basically saying, I'd be stuck where I really couldn't talk with anybody. He lived alone. And he said, I'm meeting people that are great from all over the world. So for some people who are very isolated, it's been almost really a lifeline for them.
Right. And the social aspect of social VR is something that can't be understated. I'm going to talk about it several times over the course of this presentation.
Right.
So now I'd like to step through a few different examples of different VR platforms. That environment that we're in is only one, and there's different scales with different capabilities and different access levels. So the first one I want to talk about is Mozilla Hubs. Mozilla Hubs is it's open source, it's free to use, free to play, and it supports browser-based interaction. So it runs on pretty much every device, every platform, every browser. It's wide open and completely democratized, which, as we'll point out later, is not necessarily a good thing. Another very popular example is the environment that we're in now currently, AltSpace. AltSpace has a focus more on the social interactions and presentations. So we're given a bunch of tools in here that allow us to facilitate presentations and delivering content. And then there's a lot of stuff to do outside of these presentations within AltSpace. There's games and activities and movies. There's churches, there's support groups, there's meditations and mindfulness. There's, I mean, pretty much every topic that you can think of. And ever since this whole quarantine shutdown thing, the number of events and the diversity of the events that we see popping up all over AltSpace is just mind-numbing.
Right. It's been really cool for comedy shows, actually, because you can actually have the comic walking back and forth on stage. It's really kind of fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. It's really cool. So AltSpace supports Oculus headsets, so like the Oculus Go, the Oculus Quest, and then PC tethered headsets. So a Rift, a Vive, an Index, Windows mixed reality, pretty much anything that plugs into a PC can get into AltSpace, or a Go or a Quest. So it's not quite as open as Mozilla Hubs, but it's still fairly accessible. The next example is Engage. Have you ever used Engage?
I've looked at it. I haven't downloaded it yet.
So Engage is really good. They've got a lot of tools, and their focus is on education. So they're specifically presentations around education. The structure of the environment, the way you find classes, you go to classes and attend classes, is really geared for a institutional, sort of like a collegiate system. It is not free. You can get into it for free as just an individual account, but there's a limitation on the presentations you can host and the things that you can do. A pro version, and then there's an enterprise version that open up larger presentation capabilities, more users, but the price is according to scale on that. And then at the top level, we have a platform called Glue. That is really just amazing to look at. It's got some powerful content. The avatars, the environments, the models, the meshes, everything is high resolution, high fidelity, real-time lighting. It's just beautiful. It only works on PC tethered headsets. So currently there is no mobile version of it. And it is really expensive. It's really expensive. It's like
if you wanted a team to do it, it's far from cheap.
Yeah. It's like $1,500 a year base, and then $50 a head for users on top of that.
Like it's
per really
month,
expensive.
I think.
Yeah, per month.
Per month fee for users. Yeah. So, but you get what you pay for with that. It's a really cool setup. It's just maybe for students' use, it's kind of out of their price range, maybe.
Right. Well, it's geared for corporate enterprises.
Right.
It's not really made for an educational institution. It's made for a large company like International Paper or Exxon.
Sure. Right.
All of these platforms that we've talked about have 2D versions for non-VR users. So they either run in a browser or they have an app that runs, and it gives you a nice clean view. What you folks are watching is the 2D version of the AltSpace browser. It's another client that I have. He's standing right there. He looks like a red robot, but it gives you a nice platform or medium for streaming into something like a video chat or making a recording. It also lacks the engagement of the immersive environment. it's just such a night and day difference when I'm immersed in this system, and my brain is totally believing it, and I've got the proprioception from my hands where I feel like they're, a natural extension of me. You don't get any of that stuff from the 2D client, but what you also don't get is the motion sickness. Motion sickness is something that really has to be considered when you're thinking about a large-scale virtual environment, because about 25% of your audience is going to experience some level of motion sickness. There's things that you could do to mitigate that. There's design considerations that you could put into your environment, or you could use a 2D headset. But it is going to continue to be a consideration going forward.
Right. Now, to be fair, the 6 degrees of freedom headsets like the Quest are better than the 3 degrees of freedom headsets, and there's things that you can do to make it better, but it's still an issue. Mm-hmm. And so having 2D client options for students is very helpful.
So while we're on the subject of a 2D client or desktop VR, there's some characteristics of it. You don't have to have any special equipment, so I don't have to buy a headset. I don't have to have trackers or motion controllers. It is not immersive, right? So I don't have the sense of being there. Many of them are browser-based, so there's no extra software to install. You just go to a website and open it up in your browser. And it allows for wider distribution, right? So if you really want to maximize your audience, you want something that is accessible through pretty much any mobile phone or laptop, tablet, whatever kind of device that you have that may be connected. Which leads me to the relationship between quality and audience, right? So the quality of the experience is going to be inversely proportional to the size of my audience that's going to be able to engage in this. You've got considerations like price, what kind of hardware do I have to have, what kind of experience am I trying to recreate, and then what kind of security do I want to have. This right here is sort of a secure event. It's listed as private, right? So that many people can get into it. But if it were open to the public, and many of the events in AltSpace are open to the public, then I'm going to have to manually secure that space. The solution to maintaining order when the public is coming in virtual reality is very similar to the way that you would do it in real life. You put somebody over in the corner and you charge them with kicking out the troublemakers. Some platforms do that for you. Some platforms are completely closed, and the only people that are going to be coming in are people that you want to come in. So the nature of your event has to be considered when you're thinking about stuff like security. But all of those things that improve the quality of the experience are also going to act to limit the number of people that can get into it. So if I've got something like Glue, where I've got the best experience, the best graphics, the best security, not many people are going to be able to get into it because of the hardware requirements and the price. Content is something that's very important, and content is available on all of these platforms. It's also different on all of these platforms. Every platform gives us what we call a sandbox that limits what we can do and what we can interact with. We've got some examples here of some content. I will just briefly bring the sun and moon. So this is a model that demonstrates the orbit of the Earth and the phases of the moon in the different seasons, and it's got a nice bright light associated with it. But I can move it around. I can spawn this and other worlds like it into this space, and we can manipulate them, scale them up, scale them down, move them out of the way of the camera.
But in terms of teaching, like I would use something like this in class, but taking something that we have to do with 2D maps, or I have to try to draw on a whiteboard, to being able to show this in 3D is one of the huge perks of going this route for me. There's new ways to interact with the world, even though it's virtual. There's a way to pick up three-dimensional things, and especially being a meteorologist, the atmosphere is 3D, so we need that to understand some of the processes. So this is opening new doors for all sorts of ways, irrespective of just a generic classroom. Mark and I have been talking about doing labs in this kind of world for years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then we've got other examples like the map on the wall over Alan's head is a live map that is coming in from the internet. One of my students, Marty, wrote a little script that goes out and retrieves the latest version of this map and displays it. I think it goes and it looks every 15 minutes or so. But that's an example of the type of interaction that we can add to this. It's a lot of these environments is very limited for security reasons. They don't allow us to write anything that has any kind of coded behavior to it because it'd be far too easy for me to put something malicious into this space. So in the pursuit of giving everybody a equal and quality experience, they don't allow us to do a whole lot in here.
And that's true for almost all the different providers. It's limited for security purposes on their end.
Some other common limitations. Right now, there is sort of a practical limit on the number of participants that I can get into about a space. Almost all of these platforms seem to have a limit of about 100 participants at a time in any given space. Now, there are ways around that so that we could get larger groups than 100 people engaged in a space. Motion sickness, we've talked about 25% of people who come in here are going to be susceptible to it to one degree or another. Not everybody, gets violently ill, but, even myself, after a couple hours, I start getting a little queasy.
Yeah.
It also lacks experiential interactivity. Now, Experiential VR is something that Kapil is going to be giving a presentation on the 5th of May. And he's going to be sort of looking at the other side of this coin, right? You've got experiential, well, I'm going to be talking about the difference between experiential and collaborative VR here in a second. But this collaborative social space lacks an experiential sort of magic school bus component to it. And then assessing and testing. Assessment is challenging in this space. I can do something like bring up a personal web browser and give somebody a quiz or have them take a poll, but really assessing the skills that they learn is something that is much better suited for experiential VR. Currently, there's not a whole lot in here that we can do to assess accurately the value or the efficacy of a particular presentation.
Right. And we're working on that too, but it's a challenge because you still need controls, and it's so new that it's hard to come up with valid assessments too.
Mm-hmm. So one of the ways that we can handle large events, right, and this is sort of a logical diagram of how a large event might be handled. If I have more than 100 people that need to get into a space, say I've got thousands of people that I need to handle, then I can design my space so that I sort of allow them to flow through these container worlds, all these different worlds in smaller groups. I can't put 1,000 people into one room, but I could put 100 people into 10 or 50 people into 20, and then I could start playing tricks with it. Like if all the rooms are identical, they may not know that they're in different rooms, especially if they can all see the same presenter. That's a capability that AltSpace has. If we wanted 400 people in this event, but the room is only limited to 100 people at a time, I could spawn in 3 other worlds, each with another capacity to have 100 people. And inside of each world, each of the participants would see the presenter, but they may not be able to see all of each other. So talking about experiential versus collaborative VR, and I put this in here to sort of lay the groundwork for the distinction between the research that Kapil's been doing and that we've been doing. Experiential VR, it simulates a specific interactive environment. So it could be a cell or a diatom or a human heart or something. A lot of times changing the environment in a experiential application requires changing that application. I may have one application that simulates the processes in your lungs. I may have another application that simulates an atmospheric event. I may have another simulation that has a physical, mechanical component to it. And all of those things are likely to be in separate applications. And I have to re-engineer or restart or bring up a different application if I want to change those environments. The interaction in those environments can be designed to simulate a task or an activity or a process. So I can engineer my environment so that my task is to do a specific thing on a piece of equipment, for example. And everything in the environment would be geared towards simulating that task. The testing can be built directly into the environment. And typically these experiential VR experiences are not collaborative. There are some examples where they are, but for the most part, it's just a singular experience. I'm taking my training, I'm doing my job, I'm taking my tests. That's the workflow of it. Collaborative VR simulates a largely non-interactive space, right? So we've got this really nice room here, and we've got some maps and screens and slides on the wall, but there's really not a lot of interactivity with the space itself. Spaces can be repurposed without a major change. I can teach a computer science class in here. I can teach a math class or an economics class. Well, I can't. I don't know anything about economics, but you see what I mean? I mean, we can repurpose this space for lots of different subjects without having to make a major change to the space.
Right. And the more that the project involves discussions and talking, the more quasi-generic space like this works. But if you need a specific targeted purpose or application, that's that experiential side, and it's trying to blend both, but we're still getting to that point yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then, as I mentioned earlier, testing in this environment is, I guess, limited is probably the best thing you can say about it.
Yep.
All right. So I would now we'd like to present a couple of examples of how different faculty members in different schools are using AltSpace or Social VR for their classes. There's a link at the bottom of this slide. Stephen King from the Hussman School of Journalism and Media is teaching his entire class in AltSpace. He immediately began the process of transitioning all of his students over to AltSpace, and he's designing the coursework, he's designing the environments, and he's regularly presenting to his classes in AltSpace.
Yep, they all have Oculus Go's. He has an Oculus Quest, so they're all in this immersive environment during class.
Mm-hmm. Now he was fortunate enough to run a media lab and had enough virtual headsets for all of his students.
Right.
Getting your students into the equipment typically is going to be one of the challenges that needs to be overcome. And then we've got this event itself, right? This environment, our avatars, the presentation that we're doing is another example of how these sorts of processes could be done. We could have an audience full of people in VR experiencing this same sort of thing at the same time. And then I'd like Alan to talk a bit about the work that he and Rachel are doing for their classes.
So we're approaching this from a couple different directions. So Rachel Humphrey and I basically co-teach two versions of our AHS 106 course. It's basically a natural disasters course that we teach. She's part of one section, I'm part of another. And as soon as some of the shutdown happened, we said, well, we need to make videos, but we want to do something different from everybody else. But I have 100-something students in my section. She's got 80 or 90, something like that. So we certainly couldn't get headsets out to everybody. But what we came up with was this idea of we can record, kind of like what you're seeing here on the stream, but we can record ourselves actually teaching and put the recording up of us both in VR. So it feels a bit more like a podcast. There's interaction. We're joking back and forth, taking turns with slides, and making a bit of an engaging, certainly a more engaging experience than somebody where you can't see their face, there's no emotions or whatever else, and it's just PowerPoint slides and a recording. So the idea was, how do we get something that, even if it's not really interactive, yes, the student is still just watching a video, how do we make it something better in the short term? And we came up with this in early to mid-March and said, hey, we got to make this happen. And we've been doing this since we started back for classes on the 30th of March. We've been putting up a couple of video lectures. We've done some of our slides that we would have talked about in class. We just post. So they review some slides on their own. They watch a video supplement that's a little bit shorter on each of the topics as we would have presented them. And then we make them do a quiz through our online grading system. So it makes them look through both aspects. And so we're doing some testing with the materials and some ideas of that. Now, that's what we're doing for now. And we can show you kind of how this environment works. But I'm also going to show you a video here that we have set up. It should be firing up behind you here, or behind me. But this is an example of where we would like to go with this going forward. So this is a brief demo we did. This is up online. Mark can send the link around if you want to see it. Another alt space room. Rachel's there on the left, me on the right up on stage. And then we have a few people here. You can see Mark down there on the lower left. He was kind of moderating the room. But we've got students and other faculty from around who are listening to us present. And you may not be able to hear much because of the teams and AltSpace and whatever all trying to work together. But we're flipping through slides like Mark and I are now. But we can have student interactions. When they're in this world with us, they can do things like raise their hand or give feedback that something was good or whatever else. And so we're able to get some responses from the audience. We can mute the general audience and then have them be called on. So Mark was acting as the moderator, so he could unmute people and then they could ask the question and so on and so forth. It was really a cool way to have everybody be able to participate in this room. And again, this was just a brief demo that we did, but it shows some promise, but you need everybody in a headset or with a 2D client or something to really make it work. And so that's one of the challenges we're dealing with right now is how do we take this thing that we're kind of just emergency putting up there in the short term, and how do we build this into that collaborative space where you can actually look at your neighbor and say something to them and do breakout groups and things, which you can do. There's spatial audio. Mark and I could go to the back of the room and you could not hear us. And so we could have conversations in small groups and then come back together and meet and all these other kinds of things. But you'd actually like physically walk in this space upstairs or downstairs, and your group can meet upstairs, which is really kind of cool. And then I can just call everybody back. Hey, let's talk about what we did as groups. There's lots of things that we do in a regular classroom that this would enable when the technology is in the hands of the people.
Right.
And so that's been a ton of fun.
And that sort of brings up another interesting benefit of this. Geography is irrelevant. Geometry is irrelevant. If we had too many people in here, or if we had a group in here that wanted to go to create a breakout session and go have their own discussion, if we didn't have the space in here for them to go do that, I could spawn in another space. Right, we can add spaces dynamically. We add them, take them away, expand the capacity in real time. So if somebody needed privacy or something like that, we could just, there you go. There's your own little private world you can have for the next, 20 minutes or so.
Right. And for some of these tools, they have whiteboards or other things, so you could actually work on a problem with your colleagues in this virtual space too. So there's lots of possibilities for taking this into new and useful directions for collaborations and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah. Glue especially has a lot of productivity tools, meeting tools and collaboration tools.
Immersed is good for that too.
Yes. Immersed is really good for that too. So another thing that I wanted to pick out is the future direction of education for virtual reality. And this is another instance where I don't have any relevant data to see, what the impact of the virus is. So these numbers are from the end of 2018, 2019, where they're expecting a growth rate in the K through 12 educational virtual reality market of 28%. So that's without any other kind of drivers like this virus, assuming that the virus turns out to be a significant driver. But with a 28% growth rate, we're going to be looking at millions of kids engaging on a regular basis in virtual reality as part of their education. By the time they get to college, they're going to be expecting a similar, if not better, sort of experience. So we kind of need to get ahead of this curve. When these youngsters here, when they get old enough to figure out what college they're going to go to, We want to be able to offer them the best, most modern technological experience that they can have, the best engagement, the best education.
Right.
I'm sure there's a lot you could say about planning for your VR course, huh, Alan?
Oh, there's tons I could say, and I'll just take this and shorten it a little bit. The biggest thing I think is, and Rachel and I have talked about a lot about this in course design. She's also a meteorologist, but has some science ed background as well. So she's a perfect colleague to work with for this. And one of the things we realized early was the VR thing is not a panacea. It's not going to replace everything right now. It's a tool to bring into your teaching toolbox, basically. And so, like, we're not doing all of our course in this because I still think the average student's not going to want to sit through us talking for 75 minutes. But if we can do shorter segments and make it work for students and really hit the high points of the stuff that's difficult to explain or hard to put into words without hand gestures. There's one thing we were doing with relative humidity where it's just easier to use one hand as temperature and one as dew point. And we were able to do that in this VR world, showing things the way we would in class. And that made a huge help for us for how we would normally teach in person. But it's not so much about doing everything in here. It's what lends itself well to this environment. What can we not do with standard Zoom or a 2D whiteboard thing on a computer? What do we get here? And there are still plenty of opportunities for that. And then moving toward the experiential things that Mark was talking about, and how do we build some of those into this world? If we can get those experiences collaborative and social, where you can start doing even basic chemistry labs and see what happens based on this in this kind of world, that would be great. Now, we're a little bit away from that yet, but at least as a start, you know, if we can get the social aspects of this world worked out and we can get the experiential pieces worked out, then we can work on integrating them together. And that's where I see this going in the medium term, but not in the next 2 weeks before our semester ends.
Right. Some other things that I would encourage anybody that's interested in getting into social VR, whether it's AltSpace or something else, get a headset, get into it, practice it, get the feel for it, get comfortable with it, and then engage with the community. A lot of these platforms have active Discord servers. Discord is it's an online sort of chat interface where you can go and you can talk to other users. You can ask for help. AltSpace is really good about having their admins and their developers active on Discord. So you can go and you can ask questions directly of the developers of the space and get you some pretty good answers. And that sort of engagement with the community is critical for figuring out how it all works in here. I don't know how you do it without it, really. And then you've got to provide multiple solutions for your students, right? If you can get all of your students 3D headsets, then get them 3D headsets, because that's going to be the best experience. If the ones that can't or don't want to use 3D headsets, well, we've got 2D browsers. And then the bottom line is we can take a stream and we can pipe it into Zoom.
Or Teams like we are here. Same thing.
Teams. I should have put Teams up here. I'm just so used to Zoom.
Right.
But Skype, Hangouts, whatever, right? The only problem with that option is now it becomes difficult to get bidirectional communication, especially if we want to share all of the audio, if we want to stream a bunch of video. If I had a Zoom window or a Teams window back into this environment, the latency would make it untenable.
Yeah, we tried it. It was like 20 seconds of lag or something. It was 10 to 20 seconds. It was unteachable.
Yeah.
But something to think about. For
so
sure.
You guys may be able to see and hear me, but I can't see you. I can hear you. But
right. But it does feel like I'm standing here talking with Mark.
It does.
Kind of cool.
It does. It's very convincing. I like it. Yeah. So I guess here's the call to action portion of this. Faculty and admin buy-in is critical. If this is going to be successful, then somebody has to step forward and go, wow, that looks brilliant. I think I want to do my class in virtual reality, and take ownership of it and start using it. And we're here to help. This is largely becoming part of my mission here at St. Cloud State, is facilitating and designing and just sort of assisting people getting their virtual reality courses off the ground. And then I think that is the last slide. We've made it all the way through.
We did.
Ellen, I know you've got to leave quickly. Was there anything that you'd like to?
I got another 5 minutes or so if there's questions.
Okay.
Let me add one.
Yeah.
Let me add one thing to this though,
Mhm.
and I lost my train of thought. I'll get it back. The other thing with this is because, especially of the situation we're in, there's been a huge rush on VR headsets, especially the Oculus Quest has been sold out everywhere. So adoption may be tricky because the Quest with the 6 degrees of freedom vision stuff is much less motion sickness inducing than the Go, all else being equal. And so adoption for this right now may be a little bit trickier than, say, normal times because these things are backed up everywhere. If one pops up on Walmart, it's gone within 5 minutes or something like that. So they're definitely ramping up demand. They know there's demand for this, but it may be a challenge even for the fall to get enough for a full class, especially if places are remote. Making sure these get into the hands of your students may be really, really tricky. So that's something we're considering too, is we may want to do things in VR, but can we actually pull it off in time? I mean, a Quest can be had for $400. Now, it's not nothing for money, but it's cheaper than a laptop. It may be useful for some, it may be unapproachable for others. But there are some challenges out there as new technology comes online, as all these other things change over the next couple of years. The ease of access should go much, ease of access would improve, but this will get a lot easier to get into. But part of the challenge here is being ahead of the curve, so there's things ready for people to use when they get access to this, as opposed to waiting to do that development for a couple of years until it's in the masses' hands.
Right. Has anybody got any questions?
Yeah, I do. This is Zach Nicklin.
Hey, Zach.
So I know, I picked up the Quest myself, and they're the prices are getting higher and higher on them if you can find them. Is there a mid-range one that you'd recommend, say for participants or students or whatever you want to call it there, knowing that it would still have the same issues as far as making sure that they're in stock? But is there a mid-range set that you'd recommend?
The Oculus Go.
Oculus Go?
That can be what, $150?
Yeah, they're about $150, and I think they're a lot easier to get.
Yeah, they're still in stock, I think, on Amazon and stuff now.
Yeah, they're easier to get. They're cheaper. It's a limited sort of experience. So you've only got 3 degrees of freedom, and you'll only have one hand in here. But it runs the software. It's perfectly interactive, and for a lot of use cases, it's perfectly adequate.
Right. From a student perspective, a Go would be great. I think for teaching, having both hands to talk, at least because I talk with my hands, having both hands moving around helps. But you can tell with a Go, like if you've noticed, Mark's and my hands are both moving, but our heads are moving too as we turn around. The Go will do a lot of that too. When you're on a 2D client, nothing moves but the mouth. So the head stays fixed, the arms are just stuck at your sides. And so in terms of that natural feeling for a conversation, you can really tell. And so if you're presenting, especially, I think having a Quest would be good. But for student purposes, Go's work. Some of our students have borrowed Go's from the labs, and they make it work okay.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
especially if they do it sitting down or whatever, the disorientation tends to be a little bit better because you can move without physically walking, which helps.
Right. Any other questions?
So if they're using a browser, can they still move their, I guess you'd say, like avatar around?
Yes. The interaction's more like a first-person game. You can still grab things in the environment. You can still interact with things and move around, but you use a mouse and keyboard combination. So it's the WASD keys, and you look around with a mouse, just like a first-person shooter.
Yep.
So if you've ever played one of those, it's going to be really familiar.
And then one other
I
question
always
is,
moved around the easy. Go ahead.
Can you have like a whiteboard to where if I was in there and I had, like I have the Quest, would I be able to draw on the whiteboard or no?
Not in alt space.
Yet. They're working on it.
Yet. But Glue has a whiteboard, Engage has a whiteboard. That's usually one of the first things people ask us. Wow, can I have a whiteboard? Can we draw on it?
Right.
You're gonna have to get creative with if you're trying to do something like that in alt space. But other platforms have different platforms have different content capabilities and different tools.
Right. And there's also the possibility of doing something more like Google Tilt Brush, where you're just drawing in 3D space as opposed to a flat whiteboard.
Mhm.
So you may be able to swoop with your arms and draw that way, which
Right.
would be a very different thing, but you have to have pretty precise tracking to track writing letters on a whiteboard. So there's lots of potential options for writing it, but I do know the AltSpace devs are aware and have said they're working on some sort of solution for a whiteboard type thing in this world.
Mhm. You know, and
I
that's
know lots of these companies are pursuing that.
and that's an example of you know, the limitations of the platform in favor of getting a broader audience. We can do less stuff in here. You know, the other platforms that have whiteboards also have smaller audiences, or they cost money.
Right. Or both,
Yeah.
usually.
All right, and then I have one more question. So you said you made this room, right?
Mm-hmm.
Could you have, so you have your PowerPoint in the middle right now. Let's say this was 2 rooms. Could you have a PowerPoint on the left and I forgot his name, could have his own PowerPoint on the right, and I could choose which part of this room I want to go to? Kind of like breakout rooms.
Well, there's a limitation on the number of browsers that I could have in a space, and right now
Theoretically, yes.
theoretically, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
We have
AltSpace
to-
limits things because the Go hardware is pretty low level. It limits the number of browsers that can be up in a room just so it doesn't run out of memory. But going forward, yes, that can happen. I think we're limited to 3 browsers, but with this one plus the ones we're using to control the slides, we've kind of used up what the room is capable of. But there's nothing saying that we couldn't do more with that or that they wouldn't up that number in a year or two. So the potential to have multiple screens or things is certainly there going forward.
Mhm. And other platforms do allow you to do that. Mozilla Hubs, you can have as many different browsers open as you want, I think.
All right, that's all I had for questions.
Okay.
As a follow-on to what Mark was talking about, call for action on next steps here and what we're looking at. I know we talked about the transition for a lot of the NCAT educator workshops to MCAMs, competitions, and that type of material. So I know Mark is already working with Zach Nicklin for one of the drone tech, or it's a Geotech Center regional conference that was supposed to be hosted at the aerospace site, and they're kind of talking about creating one of these environments that you can actually navigate the aerospace site and go to the different rooms and then look at either pre-recorded video or live streaming video in these type of synchronous sessions. So kind of exploring those options. I was going to have Zach speak to that a little bit, but I know we're about 5 minutes to the top of the hour here. But those are the type of things, if there's interest from this group on identifying specific events where you've got interest in exploring this, just getting the different SMEs synced up on the team to look at what's feasible for those projects. And we've already got a couple identified where we're working on this transition. And then I guess one of the other things I don't know, Mark, if you and Kapil coordinate, if Kapil had anything at the tail end here as far as lead into the presentation that he's looking at doing on, I believe it's May 5th.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have anything, Kapil, that you wanted to make sure to get out to the group?
So I guess, thank you, Mark, for giving such a wonderful presentation, and I really enjoyed it. So I guess I'll be giving a talk in 2 weeks, and the talk will be primarily focusing more in terms of the browser-based, desktop-based virtual reality-based systems that we built, and talking more in terms of the lessons learned, when we build all these virtual reality simulations, and looking more in terms of a process, that other virtual reality development groups could use when you're developing simulations that supports the needs of the actual users. So I believe the presentation is scheduled on the 5th of May, and I will closely work with Mark and with John to make sure that you have got access to the presentation. And I look forward to talking to you all on May 5th.
Looking forward as well.
Thank you very much for that, Kapil and Mark. Awesome presentation. Looking at the possibilities that are out there and the future transitions for educational delivery. You guys did a phenomenal job on the presentation here. It looks like Alan might have had to step out already.
Yeah, he had to scram.
Yeah, definitely send my thanks to him. You guys did a phenomenal job on this.
Thank you.
And with that, I'll kind of turn it back to the group here. If there are more questions, I just wanted to make sure we got a couple of those points in there. Made sure we're setting the stage for the future offerings. So
I can't wait to see the recording. I'm curious to see what it looks like.
Are you able to share your world with other people?
Yes.
Like other developers? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That was my next one. Hey,
That's
Mark, this is Zach
good.
again. Could you shoot me a link there in the Altspace chat or something?
Sure. Are you in? Why weren't you in here in a headset, man?
I actually tried to find you, and it will not. The arrow to go to your world is grayed out.
Oh, that's right, because this is a private event.
Yep.
Yeah.
I have a headset too. That would have been cool to join it like that. I started using the headset this morning for about 2 hours, and it is, once you use it, it's very immersive. It's really cool. It's hard to even explain it compared to this meeting.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's what I was gonna say too. I mean, you guys did a phenomenal job on giving a understanding of these environments, but it is super tough to really appreciate until you step into it. How
You really
immersive
can't.
environments are. You can't. Yeah. But you guys did a great job, and I appreciate Mark's comments there as far as he's looking forward to seeing this recording. That gives an indication beyond the phenomenal work here. This has been rapid turnaround. I know, Mark, you've been deep in some of this stuff for a while, but the conversations with NCAT specific to kind of thought process for all these deliveries just changed in the last 2 weeks, and comments like that where he doesn't even know what this presentation is going to look like yet and how well it went speak to the expertise of the team and that drive and innovation. So thank you.
Thank you.